My wife and I recently celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. As you could imagine, over the years we've had our share of conflicts and a few heated arguments. I recently heard a friend jokingly say that in arguments between a wife and a husband, the wife always gets the last word. If the husband gets the last word, it's just the start of a new argument. One of the things I've learned as a senior adult, which is really a euphemism for an old fart, is not to take myself too seriously. Some years ago, when I was a young pastor, there was an incident that happened at a church nearby that caused me to consider never to show my face in public again. I was asked to baptize by immersion an obese lady in a nearby Baptist church. Now, for those unfamiliar with Baptist practice, immersion means that you plunge the new convert completely under the water as a symbol of their death and burial to their old way of life, to rise in newness of life in Christ. It's a beautiful picture of the gospel, the death and resurrection of Jesus. So baptism in a Baptist church is a very sacred moment and is as revered as sacraments are in other more liturgical churches. Now keep in mind, at that point in my life, I was only 136 pounds, and I had to lay this woman back into the water from a standing position until she was fully submerged. So I had forewarned her not to open her mouth and inadvertently take in water, and I would cover her nose with a handkerchief, lay her back into the water, and immediately lift her up again. When I placed her under the water, she did exactly what I told her not to do. She opened her mouth and took in a mouthful of water, so that when I raised her up out of the water, she, for some inexplicable reason, spewed the water out of her mouth. It formed a perfect arc of water, like the water out of a fountain that extended a good 3 or 4 feet into the air. And what I said at that moment were the most regretful words of my life. For some reason, I blurted out with the entire congregation hearing every word, "I feel like I just baptized a whale." Well, it doesn't do any good to explain what I meant. Let me say that I honestly didn't intend to demean her for her obesity. I was literally referring to pictures I've seen of whales that blow out a stream of water when they swim to the surface. I thought I'd painted a beautiful word picture when, in fact, I had insulted the dear lady and her family, and I was sure at that moment the entire population of the world. Though it took me a while, I learned that that stupid verbal blunder wasn't the end of the world. For mistake-prone people like me, one of the most reassuring Bible teachings is found in 2 Corinthians 4, 6 through 9. Paul writes, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We're hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. We're perplexed, but not in despair. We're persecuted, not abandoned. We're struck down, but not destroyed." Beautiful words. What he's saying is that the light of Christ shines through his people, marred people, who are described as jars of clay. Jars of clay are easily broken and often marred. But Christ resides in us and uses us to display his glory in spite of ourselves. The Bible's full of examples where people have made poor choices and bad decisions. In the Old Testament, Moses murdered an Egyptian. David was an adulterer. Rahab was a prostitute. And Paul consented to the death and persecution of followers of Jesus. But they all deeply regretted their horrible deeds, and in contrition asked God for forgiveness. And God ended up using every one of those people in remarkable ways in fulfilling his purpose in the world. Why? The only answer is because he is a God of amazing grace and mercy. Therefore, when I mess up, God doesn't panic. He lovingly restores me and uses me in spite of my blunders. Now that's good news. You know, we've all tended to give up at some point because of our failures and our mistakes. Do we comprehend the fact that God has not given up on us? That's something to consider.